Hey guys, welcome to our third video installation in our lead book study. Uh, just to rehash, if you have not seen the first two videos of this lead book study, videos number 1 and 2, I highly recommend that you watch those videos first before watching this one. The link for the first two videos is going to be below, so you can click on those links, watch the first two videos before watching this one. Just a quick rehash, we are still delving into our chapter on reading nonfiction in our Reader's Handbook by Laura Robb. If you have one of her copies of this, great. This is the student edition that I am reading out of. Mainly we've been going over teaching strategies, but also what students should be looking for when reading nonfiction, how to teach that, and mainly content literacy in regards to that, specifically within social studies, because that is my content area. I'm going to go into the final part of the section on nonfiction reading, and the final part has to do with real-world writing. I'm going to touch on this briefly because I really want to go over the elements of nonfiction that this book goes into, because I think it's a better read for what students should be looking for, and also what they should be writing when it comes to analyzing nonfiction reading, and when it comes to writing their own essays about it. But that is a different subject. This mainly has to do with reading in the subject area. So with real-world writing, it mainly has to do, it talks about that this is as something as simple as someone trying to read instructions for building something, or trying to find something, trying to skim to something important that they just need to find out, to like finding a grade on their report card. Regardless, it's finding information, and that's how it puts real-world writing. And the reading plan, it states out a reading plan is identify your purpose for reading, understand the organization of the writing, find what you need to know, and remember the information and apply it to whatever you need to apply it to. And which is really all that needs to be said and done. And I feel that this is probably going to be the easiest for any student to really grasp when it comes to nonfiction reading. I remember being taught always to look in the index for something. If I'm looking for something specific, especially instructions, whenever there's something wrong with my car, I go to my owner's manual and I immediately go to the index. So, okay, what's it in regarding to? The transmission, the engine, the brakes, the wind washer fluid, whatever. That's just a quick example. But that's what it mainly has to do with. And it goes over just tiny examples from a handbook, a student handbook on like how many tardies are you allowed to have. It goes over computer game instructions on how to operate a computer game. It goes over a schedule, what to look for, how to read things. I think this is going to be most applicable when it comes, especially at the secondary level, when it comes to teaching human geography and physical geography, when it comes to learning periphery maps, mental maps, knowing about makeshift models, centripetal and centrifugal forces as it relates to certain graphs. I think it's going to mainly come in handy for that, since that is pretty much real-world writing and real-world reading. I remember in taking the AP Human Geography exam as a practice exam for myself when I tutored students on it. There was a mental map, and you had to read it in order to make sense of it and answer questions, essay questions based on that. But it came to really just skimming it, looking at it, knowing what to look for, and that is reading. Also, blueprint reading for the maths and the sciences, that's how it would be applicable for that. But it's still an important part of non-fictional reading, and once again, a very important section. I'm going to move on now to elements of nonfiction. Of course, it talks about argument and persuasive writing, cause and effect, chronological order, classification and definition. I really want to focus on fact and opinion, cause and effect, and chronological order, or change over time. because what students really need to know in order to be successful in my content area, they need to know how to write and how to read change over time essays or change over time texts, texts that are written in chronological order, texts that are written in a cause and effect style manner. The brief section that it goes over with the elements of it is cause and effect. It gives an example: grandmother's death in spring, and the effect is return to rainy mountain in July, whatever that means. But that was just a brief little example. But it says that the cause and effect is a relationship between two or more events in which one event brings about another. The event that happens first is the cause. The one that follows is the effect. It's raining outside, therefore I am sad. That's a cause and effect example. Students really need to know that when reading in the historical context. The Treaty of Versailles devalued the German public and what they would view as basic human rights. Thus, the effect was the rise of the Nazi Party. That's a cause and effect issue that you would need to analyze that and be able to identify when it comes to reading about history, for instance. It's very important, and I think it's important for a student to know where to find it, know when they're reading it, and it goes over it very well. The other one is, of course, we went over persuasive writing and argumentative writing and reading in the first video, so I'm not going to go too much into that. But once again, finding that viewpoint, how many times it's being stated, and being able to identify what the author's main idea or point is and what they're trying to get across. So specifically their thesis statement. Chronological order or change over time is going to be mainly useful also when teaching agriculture and also when teaching timelines. It's very useful specifically when teaching Asian history, I feel, when it comes to teaching all of the dynasties. And in American history, it's very easy to teach as well. How I want, ideally, if I were to teach an American history or U.S. history class, I want to separate each unit, regardless of how the text separates it. I like to separate it by presidential administration. I think that's a good cohesive way of outlining it. And that's how I outlined it in my head when I was in high school, and that's how I continue to outline it in my head even into college. And it worked for me. Something I would like to spread with that, but it's a good chronological order way of organizing history. Asian dynasties, once again, it's great to broaden that out as a chronological order timeline. And it uses a timeline here as an example, explaining Galileo's life. So any way you can use it in a social studies classroom. But also you need to show the change over time specifically, and how it changed, whether it changed and compare, and once again this gets into compare and contrast a little bit. I'll get to that in a minute. But the chronological order, they want you to be at least a grader for social studies writing and reading. I want you to be able to identify what changed and how it changed over a specific time period. What was the mode of thinking from the Gilded Age to the Industrial Revolution? What was the change that was occurring within the Progressive Era? What about during World War I? What treaties or the Great Depression and the New Deal? These are just examples that are immediately coming into my head that I would probably use in a chronological order sense. But when it comes to reading this, it goes into a great amount of detail in how to identify that. And I really enjoy that it actually does that. And even in a student edition, as a teacher, you can point out this is what a student needs to know, and you can apply that to your to your teaching strategy somehow. The next one is comparison and contrast. This, of course, exists everywhere in history. You have to compare and contrast. They love, us as historians, we love comparing and contrasting other regimes and other points of civilization. Compare the Greeks to the Romans and contrast them. Compare and contrast the Axis powers to the Allies. Things along those lines. We love seeing those comparisons and those contrasts, mainly to see how different, and this is mainly for a student, to see how different everything would operate, but also how much humankind is always. I mean, we're a very alike being in the case that we operate having the same mental capacities that really aren't all that different, regardless of what your opinion is or what you think. And that's the whole idea of studying the social studies, and it's the analyzation of that. It's the constant analyzation of that, changing and it constantly changing. So those are specific elements of reading nonfiction that a student must know, and that this book goes over very well, delves into a lot of detail with what the student needs to know, what they need to think about while they are reading this specific kind of text, and but more specifically, how to identify that. And I believe that's the most important part that this text drives home. Well, that concludes this video, and of course concludes this lead book study on our chapter. It's chapter 5 on reading nonfiction for students in our Reader's Handbook by Laura Robb. If you would like some copies of the pages of chapter 5 in reading nonfiction, I'll be happy to scan you some. My email address is at the end of this video. Feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to send them to you. Feel free to comment below. Let me know what you think of the video. Let me know what your opinions are, and if you have anything to add or anything to critique, please, I encourage you to do so. Please comment below. I hope you enjoyed this and as much as I did, and I hope to see you guys soon.